Welcome to In Tune. I'm your co-host, Matt Rector, an aspiring luthier from Baltimore, Maryland.
And I'm your other co-host, Ethan Morset, a music producer and founder of Blue Haven Music based in Minnesota.
Our goal is to provide value to enterprising musicians, artists, and craftspeople by sharing our conversations and the lessons we've learned along the way.
If you like our content, help us out by following us and giving us a positive rating on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. Tune in for new episodes on the first and third Wednesday of each month.
This is episode 39. It's the end of 2024, and today Ethan and I are going to be looking into the future and discussing some of our long-term goals and just where we see ourselves in the future. Ethan, I will let you kick this off since I kicked off the last episode.
Dang.
What are some of your long-term goals? And in a perfect world, where would you see yourself in 10 years?
All right. If you work with me at my company, stop listening here. Okay, in 10 years, I will be 42. You will be 41. First and foremost, and most importantly, we will still be doing this podcast, and we'll be on episode 200 something, and we'll have a lot of followers.
Probably more than that.
In 10 years, I hope to be self-employed. I hope to be, hopefully, most of my income is passive. I imagine myself probably still technically working in an office or somewhere physical in some capacity, just for the social aspect of it. What else? I'm the one who came up with this idea, so I should have a bunch of ideas. I would say like the biggest thing, like as far as like a real dream and what I would like, where I imagine myself being if I continue down this path, is again just no longer having to work for a living and having my money work for me and being able to choose to work and choose to work what I want, and choose what I work on. And so for me, that will mean having passive income built up, being able to work on music. I imagine myself being able to wake up, not whenever I want, but like maybe like wake up like a little bit later, so my day doesn't have to start at 7:30 a.m. I wake up in the morning and I can start at like 8 or 8:30, and I can work 4-hour days instead of 8-hour days, and I have flexibility where I can do a Europe trip and be there a month without having to worry of vacation. That's kind of where I would hope I would be in 10 years, because 10 years is a long time, and I've already got momentum where I'm at right now. I imagine that Matt and I will still be friends, and we'll still be doing the podcast. I don't know. I mean, besides that, I imagine that I will be a better drummer and a better guitarist and a better piano player. I'm trying to think what else. What are other things that you might be like, I'll have kids by then, right? But like, I'm trying to think for like me, not being necessarily wanting parenthood in the future. I would imagine I would still be in the Midwest, like Iowa or Minnesota area still.
You never know. Maybe you'll end up in LA or Nashville.
Possibly. Not where I would envision, but could be.
You'll have a huge studio there and be a big shot music producer working with all of the big name artists.
Like Taylor Swift, because she's still making music in 10 years. I don't know. I mean, that's really high level, but I think that's, I guess, what we kind of wanted for this episode.
I'll say a few things, and then if anything comes to your mind, you can feel free to jump in.
Yep.
So I do think in 10 years, Abby and I will definitely want to have kids by that point, probably within the I don't know, next 2 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like to get into a house within that time frame. It's kind of frustrating because it seems more and more like that is just getting further and further out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
Like no matter, like I'm definitely in a better financial situation than I'm in a pretty good financial situation now.
Mm-hmm.
And even so, like it feels even further out of reach than like before with the way inflation is going and the housing market. And we were talking a little bit earlier before we started this episode just about inflation and rising cost of living and stuff like that and who that's affected. And yeah, but anyway, that could be a whole nother discussion, but that we're not going to get into. But yeah, so some of my long-term goals, I guess I'll talk a little bit about, I'll just talk a little bit about my personal life first, since I'm already kind of on that subject, and then I'll talk a little bit more about Rector Guitars. I do think that if Abby and I like have kids, that there's a good chance that we're going to want to be closer to our family.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of our listeners who don't know, Abby and I, we moved out here. Abby's my wife. We moved out here to the East Coast. We live in the Baltimore area. She actually moved out here first. She had an internship, and we were long distance for about a year, and then I followed her out here. And we weren't married at the time, but after about a year of me being in Maryland, we ended up getting engaged. We were engaged for a year, and now we've been married for 3 years. Yeah. So time flies, right? It's
Yeah.
kinda hard to believe.
It is really hard to believe.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I do think though we've really enjoyed living here in Baltimore and Maryland. Baltimore gets a bad rap, but honestly, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. I guess that's probably not a glowing endorsement. It's not that bad.
No, but there's a point to be made that it's rarely as bad as people make it out to be, right? Are there bad things that happen in Baltimore? Yes. Is it less safe maybe than some other towns? Yes, it's a bigger city. But
Yeah.
is it as bad as it's made out to be? Probably not.
Yeah, so we've had a good experience living here. We've made some good connections, and if we moved away, I'd definitely be sad, to be farther away from some of the people I've gotten closer with and made friends with out here. But I think that, there's that expression when you have kids, like it takes a whole village, right?
Yep.
And actually that was something that I said at my wedding when I gave my little speech. I remember that I said something about, the event, how it sort of touched me, how everyone came together and helped out and made it happen.
Yep.
But yeah, I do think that we want to be closer to family. It's just easier with that support system. And I'm not saying that I want everything to be easy, but I'd also like for my children to be able to be more involved with extended family and grandparents and that sort of thing and know them. And Abby's family is there. My family is there. And there's a good chance if we decide that we want to have kids that we may want to move back to Iowa. Cost of living is lower there. There's some pros.
Mm-hmm.
So the flip side of that is that it's sort of confusing for me when I think a little bit about Rector guitars, right? Because
Yep.
having a either guitar repair business or just custom guitar business, while we live in the internet age and you can reach people everywhere, a lot of times some of the initial building of business really comes from local, and I think for something like Luthery, it can be hard to like build up that business in areas that it's hard enough to begin with, but it's probably even harder in areas with smaller metropolitan populations. And so that's a challenge. I do think one way that has maybe interested me that I could differentiate is, I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but like there's places in Iowa like the Amana colonies that have like a craft tradition and craft heritage. And if somehow I could tie into that, I think that could be a good way to do it. But that's sort of a vague idea. My wife, she has done some work part-time, like just on the side as a day of wedding coordinator. And she really likes doing that. She likes weddings and helping, make people's wedding days as amazing as it can possibly be. And I think if we ever had, the means to do so, we'd like to buy some land in Iowa where we could actually build up, several facilities on the property. We could have our home. We could have a wedding venue. We could have a extensive woodworking shop and guitar building shop. And that's sort of the pipe dream for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having land isn't cheap, building houses isn't cheap, but that's sort of the pipe dream for us. And that may not happen in 10 years. It might happen slowly in smaller steps, but I would really love for something like that to happen someday.
I get that.
So that's kind of what I guess the long-term goal is for me.
Well, and as long as you're staying on your path, a lot can happen in 10 years. I mean, you were in a totally different spot 10 years ago. So I think if your momentum and your direction is where you want to go, like 10 years can add up to a lot. I think the key is just like making sure you're heading in the right direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
For what you want. And I would also say that as much as I'm biased and want you to move back to the Midwest because I'm selfish, at the same time, like, there's a lot of possibility out there, right? And maybe like it makes sense from a Luthery perspective to be in a bigger town, but maybe there is something you can do that, like, beyond what you're already thinking, that makes you think so much more even outside the box, that does something unique, that is possible in Iowa and is actually lucrative in Iowa. Like, you don't know what kind of, like, I feel like maybe that's something you can start like journaling about and coming up with ideas right now. And maybe you'll have your idea that's like, yeah, this is totally going to work.
I got to stop sharing my ideas on this podcast because people are going to steal them. But
yeah, keep them secret.
I do have a sort of vague idea because I have gotten involved with a makerspace out here in Baltimore. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a community center for people who make things. So,
Yep.
A lot of people don't necessarily have the means or the space to have a whole workshop full of CNC and 3D printers and woodworking machines, table saw, like all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so something that has been sort of common or is popping up more and more, especially in like bigger cities around the country, are these maker spaces where it's usually they're a nonprofit organization that owns or rents a space, and you pay for a membership and you have access to those tools. So I think there's maybe a couple in Iowa, but I don't know how big they are, but I thought that would be something cool that I could do, or maybe just even some sort of like artist collective of some kind.
And Des Moines would probably be your best place for that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there are a lot of ideas. There's a lot of ideas that people have thought of already, but there's also a lot of ideas that people have never thought of. And I feel like it's easy to be like, well, this isn't going to work very well in a small city, or it will only work like that, very much closed-minded, there's only one way kind of thinking. I feel like if you remain open to ideas and open to, this is going to sound so cheesy, open to ideas and open to possibilities, and try to think outside the box and practice coming up with ideas and practice being receptive and open-minded to ideas, that you could quite possibly, whether it's this maker space or artist collective or whatever else, that you could quite possibly figure out what that thing that is going to work for what that is the Venn diagram intersection between things that would be lucrative in Des Moines, Iowa, and things that I would like, things that are related to lutherie. How can I make guitars in Des Moines, Iowa, and make it lucrative? What makes me unique? I just feel like don't be small-minded with that, right? Like, don't think you have to be in a big city to be successful as a luthier. How can you make it different, or what can you do differently to make it successful? What makes you stand out, or how can you tweak it for a smaller town to make it successful? I feel like there are opportunities out there. I don't know what they are, but I feel like remaining open to that as a possibility might help you discover what some of those ideas and opportunities are,
Yeah.
Or maybe you stay in Baltimore, who knows, but I still think it is just like nowadays with the internet, it's possible for musicians to not have to live in LA. And while that is a different craft than a physical craft, because it can be digital now, I feel like maybe you and I need to have maybe you and I can have a brainstorm session sometime,
Well, I mean,
and like try to come up with ideas.
Like, I'm obviously not Gibson Guitars, but like Gibson's Acoustic Factories in Bozeman, Montana, right? Like, and I actually don't really have a great hold on like how big of an area that is, but like,
what, you need space?
I mean, I just mean there are luthiers who ship their guitars all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
To retailers and shops all over, not just big guitar brands. I'm talking like small independent luthiers who, build a handful of really high-end instruments a year. And once you get your name out there, you don't necessarily have to be someplace physically. I mean, if you've built up your brand, like, and have that reputation, you're probably not going to have an issue selling to people who want your product,
Mm-hmm. I just think there is opportunity there. I think sometimes it's really easy to be like, well, it's not possible, or I won't be able to figure out a way to make it work unless I live in a big city. Yes, there are realities, but there are also new ideas that don't exist yet, and that who's to say that you won't come up with that and figure out a way to make it lucrative or feasible,
I appreciate the optimism.
It's not just optimism. I feel like it's still it's not, sometimes optimism has a negative reputation, right? Because it's like, I'm ignoring reality for positivity. I don't think it's ignoring reality. I think it's optimism that is based in potential, you know? Anyway, no, you have a lot clearer of an idea what 10 years looks like for you than for me. I will say you did think I will have my own standalone studio that's bigger than a bedroom in 10 years.
Nice. You should, once I have my property up with all of my, you should just build it as part of a complex, and we'll just have like
the Rector complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
I
a fan.
I wouldn't be opposed to having a music studio close by.
It would be good.
We could co-produce in tune there. We could do our podcast in person.
And then we could do a Rector Guitars jingle, and we could make songs with Rector Guitars, and we could make a hit, like a huge hit with Rector Guitars. Be like, this song was made with a Rector guitar. Listen to how beautiful these lush acoustic chords are. Yeah, I think that's like the only other thing that I can think of for 10 years from now. I think it's a good idea to visualize what that looks like, because that does help you kind of be like, kind of know what direction you want to be heading in, and get an idea of what that, like, sometimes you need to figure out what the destination is before you can figure out how to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I needed to know that I'm going to California before I can draw the map to get there, or figure out what directions I need to get there. So I feel like that's kind of what this exercise is like, this is what I think is attainable in the next 10 years if I follow a path, and okay, now how do I make it happen?
Yeah, I heard something sort of along the lines of that was sort of inspiring, and I know I'm going to butcher it. I don't remember who said it or what exactly it was, but it was basically along the mindset of, if you have a long-term goal, sometimes you envision that thing that's far off in the distance, and or that goal that seems so far away, and if you try to imagine every step and every possibility along the way of how you're going to get there, it can become really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
But can you imagine, the next step, or one step in the right direction? And if you can do that and take that one step and then take that next step, then as long as you are doing that and moving forward, eventually you're going to get there.
If I'm trying to get to California, and as long as whether I'm walking, driving, whatever, maybe I'm rolling on the ground to California, like, I'd
like to see that.
If I'm rolling in the right direction, eventually it's just a matter of time. But
is that what you're going to do on our next backpacking trip? Only rolling?
Yeah, it's going to be a new trend. I'm going to get it on TikTok.
Well, you'll go really fast down the mountains, just really slow up.
The TikTok rolling challenge. Hike the whole Appalachian Trail by rolling. I'll definitely die. Anyway, did you have any other things you wanted to visualize what your next 10 years are going to look like?
I'm visualizing you rolling now, but
you're welcome.
That's part of your 10-year plan now.
Rolling down the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, that's part of your 10-year plan now. You said it in this podcast episode. It's official.
It'll be like step aside, Triple Crown. I'm gonna create my own thing.
All right.
Terrible.
Okay. Well, on that note, I do think that's all I had for today. This wasn't really meant to be
It's supposed to be a fun episode.
yeah, this wasn't really meant to be necessarily a perfect plan, like we were saying before. It's just we're at the end of the year, and sometimes I think it's important to take a step back and not be so caught up in what you're doing right in the moment, and think about what you really want for the future, so that you can sort of realign and center yourself so that you can take those steps.
And maybe reigniting your excitement a little bit for like the destination, not getting caught in the mundane, but being like, this is achievable in the next 10 years. I'm excited about this being my life in 10 years from now, you know? I don't know. It's a little cheesy, but
cliche because it's true.
That is itself become a cliche.
All right. Do you want to take us out, Ethan?
Yes. That is all we have for episode 39. Until next time, stay tuned.